Pacific Cacao and Chocolate. That's what we're here to talk about. But before we start, what I wanted to do was to say a quick prayer, just to start things off as we do in our culture. So just 1 second. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Father, for this wonderful day. Thank you for bringing all these wonderful people who've given up their time to be with us and to share with us their knowledge and their passion for cacao and cocoa and also chocolate. And may we speak well and dream well and share well with all of the people here today. And thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So wonderful. Thank you, guys. We have more than half of our panel here today. It's lovely to see you all. It's very cold in New Zealand at the moment. But first off, before I start to go into our conversation, I wanted just to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves to this panel. This is all of or some of the people that are involved in the show, which is Pacific Cacao and Chocolate. And they've been very wonderful to be here today with us. So I think I'll just start from the top of my screen, and I'll just ask you to say a quick warm welcome to everybody and introduce yourselves. Fipe?
Talofa lava, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Talofa lava, everyone. My name is Fipe Preuss. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country, which is also known as Nam on the Kulin Nations, also known as nowadays as Melbourne, but Wurundjeri country is the traditional lands and the traditional peoples here in Australia, Melbourne. I am a community cultural development practitioner. I'm also an artist and a chocolate maker and the co-owner of Living Coco, which is a chocolate manufacturing and cacao manufacturing space here in Melbourne.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fipe. Simone, Mike.
Yeah, hi. I'm Simone, and we're living in Raglan, which is a little coastal town in New Zealand. Raglan Chocolate has been going since 2017, and Mike was doing that for 4.5 years on his own. So the last 6 months I've joined in on the organisation side of things while Mike's free to make chocolate. Yay!
Simone does everything. I just make the chocolate.
So yeah. So yeah, we're really passionate about this short chain from grower to maker. So really happy to be part of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike and Simone. And we'll go up to Una.
Kia ora, Digwich. My name is Una. I was born in Ireland. And I am beyond passionate about cacao and the power of this incredible plant. And I have over 18 years experience in the craft industry, chocolate industry in New Zealand. But I am now really focused on being able to support the gap between actually being on the ground with the farmers, ensuring sustainable, true sourcing and supporting chocolate companies and consumers and being able to directly access Pacific cacao in the most powerful way. And I'm also very passionate about cacao as a health food and what it can do for you and for so many people. And I spend a lot of time educating as many people as possible so they really understand chocolate, cacao, and the powerful benefit it is in our lives. So we really changed the whole industry in a most extraordinary positive way. So it's beautiful to be here. Thank you, Flores.
Thank you, Una. Wonderful. And Arif, please.
Kambula from Fiji. My name is Arif. I'm the founder of Cacao Fiji. We started in 2014. And traditionally, Fiji had a thriving cocoa industry. We exported close to 500 metric tons until 1987. And we are trying to grow. I see a lot of potential exporting single origin to bean to bar chocolate makers throughout the world. So we are trying to grow the industry. It's been very challenging, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel and want to grow it via smallholder farmers.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arif. Elia, is there any of our other farmers that have joined us today? Oh, no.
Sorry, Flores. Sorry. I think this is going to be us today.
All right, fantastic. Just make sure that, you know, try to put them through if they do come in a little bit late. Maybe they can introduce themselves later towards the program. Thank you. All right, well, I'll introduce myself. I guess for people who are watching who don't know who I am, my name is Flores New. I was born in Samoa. I'm a 4th generation cocoa woman, farmer. I came to New Zealand when I was a child, and then I had the opportunity to go back to Samoa back in 2014 and take up my ancestors' land. And I'm very passionate, as those of you who know me, I'm very passionate about cocoa, cacao, and also making chocolate. And what I'm most advocate for is the land and the soil and nature and our heritage as Indigenous people of the land. So that's what the message that I try to bring to everything. And I think in having this show, the Pacific Cacao and Chocolate Show, which is, we're so fortunate that we were supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade to put on this Pacific Cacao and Chocolate Show. And also our collaborative partners, SBS Biosecurity and Grow Asia Pacific, who have been so wonderful to support this all the way. And I'm also very super grateful to all of you here today, particularly Raglan Chocolate, who have spent over the past few months rolling in the deep in terms of making all the chocolate bars and samples for the show, and really just kind of mucking in community style, which is absolutely what I love. And we're so fortunate to have people in New Zealand that are able to support us over in the islands as well. And then of course, all of you chocolate makers and cacao farmers from the Pacific who've sent through your samples to be made into chocolate, to be tasted by some top quality international judges, you know, who've got amazing experience in the industry. It's a little show. However, we've got some big people in the show who kind of make it all just really wonderful and unique, in the sense that there's so much community backed up in this show. So I'm really, really, really grateful to everybody here. So I wanted to have a conversation today. We thought it would be fantastic to bring farmers together and to bring chocolate makers, the people that are, you know, part of the value chain for cocoa or cacao, and to really kind of delve in deeper into what are we doing for our industry, and how can we move it forward, and how can we, you know, make it better for the people who are on the land growing it, and for the people who are making it in the factories as well, and in their chocolate kitchens. And I guess bean to bar is a very unique space. So I wanted to create a conversation around that and see if we could continue this, you know, because there are many shows that come and go, but we want to have something that's lasting, and that we can create an organization, a group of people who are going to come together and continuously support smallholder farmers in the Pacific going forward. So that's why we've created some questions today. But before we go into the questions and start having this conversation, I'd like to show a little video that was made by Grow Asia Pacific recently, which kind of speaks to what we're trying to talk about today. Thank you, Elia.
There's the freshness of the bean, and there's also where that bean came from. We have this, this strong connection with the Pacific. It's our backyard. It's our people we're supporting.
It's a great unknown as to why the beans taste different. All we can say is that they do.
One of the absolute dreams when we started was to be able to actually talk to the growers. The Swiss and Belgians, they still have it in their heads that they're the only ones in the world who make good chocolate.
They want to know where did the ingredients come from, and it's easy for us to tell our story. It's right here.
It's a happy relationship of doing the right thing and actually getting some good stuff out of it.
I felt a connection with the people.
Wonderful.
Nice
Thank
one.
you so much. Yeah, that is a really beautiful video. Thank you, Grow Asia Pacific team. And I'm sure they're actually listening in at the moment as well. So it really is about the people. Cacao, for us in the Pacific, it is about the people. It's about the people on the land doing the work, and then having that translate into not just a reward, but something that they can continue for generations to come, and to have their livelihoods guaranteed. And that's sort of why it is very, very important that we connect as a people and community. So I wanted to take us to the questions that we had prepared in terms of how we all feel. And I'd like to just hear from each and every one of you on your take on this question. And we can go from the top again, from Fipe. So the first question that we wanted to prioritize was, what do we think about, can Pacific Cacao support the craft chocolate industry in New Zealand? And we can talk about this in terms of Australia as well, because Australia is part of the Pacific in this conversation. So can Pacific Cacao, the volumes that we're doing and the qualities that we're doing, can it support the craft chocolate industry in both countries?
Thanks, Florence. Thanks for passing it to me first. I think that's a kind of a difficult question. In Australia, there's a huge craft chocolate industry, and it feels like every few months there's another craft chocolate company popping up, which is amazing, great. I've had, as one of the largest importers of Samoan cacao to Australia, I've had people within the craft industry and people who are, I guess, the in-between, within craft and probably the next step up, the cocoa blacks of Australia, that kind of area, asking if we can bring in, huge amounts that when I've approached Samoa on their own, it was something that we weren't quite ready for, or we weren't able to do it within their timelines. So maybe not just within Samoa, but I think if we approached it as a, and looking at the full Pacific, that might be something that could support the Australian craft chocolate industry. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No worries.
I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Well, it's a holistic view, really. I think we need to be supporting it, and so it ties into a question further down. How can the chocolate industry support the growers in return? And so I think the work that yourself, Floris, and Una are doing with building the quality in the supply chain. I think those are the absolute key things that if we could take that to every island in the Pacific, so that the sources, the different flavors can be bought out, we can work with that. So it's supply chain is probably one of the early hurdles. I looked at Pacific Cacao several years ago, and because I hadn't made contact with either of you, it was very difficult to purchase anything economically, especially at our tiny volumes. So if we can think about the structure of sourcing as a main thing, but obviously the quality has to go hand in hand for it to meet the bean to bar manufacturers' need for quality and willingness to pay the appropriate price. That's
great. That's fantastic. Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Simone, or?
No, I am in total agreement.
Okay, awesome. Can we move to Arif? What is your view on that? Is it possible for the volumes that we're producing right now in the Pacific to be able to support the industry?
The Cacao Fiji and the industry challenges over here is able to meet the demands. We have a lot of interest, and having the Pacific Cacao and Chocolate Festival is a great platform to create awareness. In 2015, we were given a top 50 rating in Paris with the Chocolate Awards, and we had giant chocolate makers like Bologna quite interested in Whittaker's ordering a container, but we were not able to meet that. So I think especially we have a lot of interest with the New Zealand bean to bar, and it's a growing movement. Our major export is US, and after that is New Zealand. I think it's a growing movement, the single origin. And some work has been done by ACR on cacao genetics and reproducing award-winning chocolate beans. So there was a time where a lot of these chocolate makers in the US, including Otago Chocolate, won a gold award, I believe in 2015 or 16, using our cacao beans. So the demand is there, and given global logistic challenges and costs, I think it makes sense to stimulate local Pacific economies. But with that being said, there needs to be a rigorous awareness and outreach within the farmers who are quite out there in the rural areas. And we need to work with organizations such as PFON and even the local Ministry of Agriculture to say, hey, this is an industry we really need to grow. And we've been struggling with that because they don't see what we see, that this is a growing industry, the bean to bar movement, the single origin movement. And I think it's going to continue to grow based on what I see in the US market. I think we really need to join hands and create some serious awareness so we can meet the demands.
Great, wonderful. That's absolutely right. I'll move on to you, Una.
Thank you. I really see that working hand in hand with the boutique craft industry is really important, particularly in the Pacific, so that the quality and the growth can happen hand in hand. So the Pacific isn't necessarily able to take up a massive order like from Valrhona or a really big company. But right now there are a lot of boutique, beautiful beans produced, for example, in the Solomons, that is being sold to the bulk market because there isn't a market. And my endeavor really is to try and create that market so these beans are actually getting the value that they deserve on the ground by the farmers who are doing extraordinary work. And a big part of that is really educating the craft chocolate companies, because there's a level of, and this, how do I put it? Well, whereas Peruvian beans or Ecuadorian beans or beans with a lineage of like an ancient history has got quite a lot of kudos on labeling, whereas any flavor profile can be provided from the Pacific. Like if a chocolate company says to me, I want a rounded chocolate note, I want a deep note, we can find those beans and we can provide them because the Pacific provides such a vast terrain of flavor. So the more we can work together with beautiful companies like Raglan Chocolate, the more we can actually educate the other niche chocolate companies so that we can grow the quality. But right now, I'm seeing an excess of boutique beans being sold at least, like in the Solomons, 10 local dollars below their value. So there is capacity there. And then also we have to grow hand in hand so it's sustainable. And that's really important because what we want to do in the Pacific is get it right rather than a massive growth and then falling over and creating lots of problems in the supply chain. So that connection, that communication, exactly what the Cacao and Chocolate Show is doing is really important for the growth, for the future. And there is capacity there, but not necessarily massive capacity, but there is capacity. And we have to find the right market for that, for it all to grow really holistically and well together.
That's fantastic. That's rounded that off really well for us. We're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A box, which is going to be very challenging because we're going to have to go to them after, but we'll try and get through our questions and then we'll come back round and have a quick look at that. I won't speak too much until the very end in case I take up so much time, but I wanted to say that as a farmer, because there isn't, it's just myself and Arif as farmer representatives here on the panel. As a farmer there, especially I can only speak from Samoa, there's a lot of beautiful beans as well, as Una says, that could go very well within the boutique industry, but it's also being sold and being made into our koko Samoa, which is fantastic, and it's building that part of our industry. But it's also being sold in other areas for other companies that are probably not the value that these people, these farmers are looking for. I know that there are particular smallholder farmers in Samoa who do a great job at fermenting their beans and taking very good care of the processes that they're doing, but they're not quite reaching the markets that they want, that niche that they're wanting. So I guess also it's a thing of communication. It's a thing about us coming together, and I think this is why this show has eventuated. It's about bringing people together and having that conversation under the one space, and just having regular conversations like this. But I'll move on to the next question because there's a lot of interesting questions about unemployment and seeking opportunities in cocoa farms in Australia and New Zealand, from Australia and New Zealand. So I think it's really sparked up a very nice conversation already. The second question, if I could go back to the beginning, what would it take for the Pacific producers to create their own profitable local markets if they weren't able to get the right price for what they're looking for? What can they do so that they can still serve their own? So one of the big concerns is in the Pacific is that we don't want to we don't want to lose all the great, beautiful, high-valued produce that we make and have nothing for ourselves, because we also need to look at health, and we need to educate our young that are growing up about what is available here. We don't want in 10 years' time for people children in Samoa to not know what cocoa is because it's all going out somewhere else. But yeah, if we were to create so if a whole bunch of cocoa farmers were doing tree to bar, for example, how would that impact, your boutique industry and the bean to bar in other countries then? So your thoughts on that, Phoebe, please.
My thoughts on if Samoa was to create, if Samoan farmers were to create their own bean to bar business, I think that would be great. I think that would be great for Samoa. I think it would be great for us. I think any businesses that are adding value to the farmers and also supporting their cacao, creating local markets is wonderful. I guess it just depends if that's something that the farmers really want to do. I would prefer, just from my perspective, I would prefer to be giving them the best price for their koko. I know how hard it is just to concentrate on one business, on one value income. So to have several different income streams can be really challenging too, and a lot of pressure. Which is another thing, where do you put your energies into as a farmer as well? Like it's hard work. I come from a long line of cacao farmers and post-harvest processors as my family through the 60s and 70s, and I know how difficult that work is as well. Yeah.
Awesome, great, thank you. Mike and Simone.
I haven't put a lot of thought into this question, to be honest. Thought more about some of the others. But if there's any way we, with some technical skills, could support any of the farmers or farmer communities or whatever on the islands who want to progress that, I'd volunteer absolutely to be able to support that. So possibly that's of value, or alternatively some sort of collaborative facility, whether it was on one of the islands or it was here in New Zealand, that was specifically focused on helping small producers produce their own product or something like that, potentially owned by those people or something. Any ideas like that, I would happily discuss with anyone. There's potential there. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. That's great.
Also talking more farmers as well to one-on-ones, I think is probably good because they'll have their own ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Fantastic. I'll go to you, Arif, if that's okay.
Yeah, Flores, I had some static. Could you repeat that question again, please?
Sure, absolutely. So, what would it take for the Pacific producers to create their own profitable local products, local markets? For example, we already have this local product in Samoa, which is called Koko Samoa, which has taken a huge chunk out of our beans in terms of the exported beans. So, what are the possibilities? I mean, I know that there's a few chocolate makers already in Fiji. So how does that?
I think, looking at when I do a comparison with Fiji's cacao industry and Cocoa Samoa, I think Cocoa Samoa had probably kept the cocoa industry alive since we were primarily export based and we didn't create a demand for the locals, and that led to the demise of the industry. But of course, time has changed. We actually ventured into this. It's a very challenging industry. And in 2018, we started Vanua Chocolate with the help of my wife, Zane, who's probably on the webinar as well. But we saw a demand from the tourism industry, and that assisted our transition. So if there is a local demand, I think, the growers can get together and probably do something of that sort. Although I know it's challenging. There's a lot of training needed, the nuances of tempering and packaging, etc. But if there's a local demand, they should collaborate and do something of this, because it's part of the sustainability of the cocoa industry. For example, with the challenges in COVID, we were still selling a lot of chocolate. Or rather, we're selling a lot of pastry infused with our local chocolate, and that was a hit. So I think it's a good idea. Again, it's challenging, and you know, gentlemen like from Raglan Chocolate, if he's able to assist in some transition, that would be great. But for us, Cacao Fiji, we are still very much interested in connecting with different chocolate makers and exporting our cacao, because our Vanua chocolate demand right now is very small, and it's locally based.
Fantastic. All right, I will go to Una.
Thanks, Flores. So something that's really, really close to my heart and I feel extremely passionate about is that one of the fundamental differences and changes that can happen is that every cacao cocoa farmer actually consumes their own crop. And Samoa is very rare around the world where the farmers know how to actually ferment, sun-dry, and make their own cocoa Samoa. So in the Solomons, the majority of farmers have never tasted their own cocoa before, ever. They will buy Milo as a treat, and they may not even know the pods on their trees that they're growing is what goes into Milo. That's how big the disconnect is on the ground. And for that to change, for the farmers to have the health benefits, it's fundamental that they actually, in some way, however we do that, they have the opportunity to learn. And it can be so, you know, the tools are very basic in what's needed. And Flores and I have done that in the Solomons in terms of bringing it into the villages. So that's really, for me, a fundamental passion, is to create a local market in every country that grows cacao. The second aspect that is something to consider is the fact that countries like New Zealand and Australia import hundreds of thousands of tonnage of cacao powder, cacao butter. I'm not talking about craft high-end bean to bar. There are other levels in the supply chain that require less skill, but can be produced on island, that is being imported from all around the world except the Pacific. And for example, in the Solomons, they import 1,000 tons of cacao powder back into the Solomons. So they export beans. The farmers may get $10 locally for those beans. If they want to make a chocolate cake, they pay 70 local dollars for a kilo of cacao powder. That's what's there on the ground. There's such opportunity for fundamental change. That's not even to the level of bean to bar, you know. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and as I said, particularly in the Pacific, we're coming in later in the game, so we can learn from the rest of the world and really do it in a real way. Because when I was working in the Solomons, and I've worked, you know, with Flores and Samoa, I went to Peru and I thought I was going to learn so much from the farmers and how they use their own cacao. They've all gone towards making bean to bar chocolate, which they sell in Lima, the capital, but they don't consume it themselves. So they're all competing on that level, but they haven't developed a local market. So they're not getting the health benefits. They're not getting the enjoyment of their own cacao. So yeah, there is immense opportunities, and I just see the possibility of collaboration, definitely fundraising, because we've got to get this off the ground to create the momentum. But we have great competitive advantage with the Pacific in terms of creating value-added cacao products on island. We don't have long supply chains. You know, it's 2 weeks. We can use fresh beans. We actually can completely compete on that level with international products. It just takes some work from this moment forward. Yeah.
And thank goodness we're starting that. We started.
Absolutely, we're in it.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I wanted to go back to Fipe because I think she wanted just to add something to her question, to her answer last time.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Una was saying. And I also wanted to add, you know, there are other industries that cacao can come into that aren't just the craft chocolate industry. At Living Cocoa, using all components of the bean, using the butter, the skin, like we're making body scrubs with the oils from Samoa. So, you know, just to be able to look around in the Pacific to all these incredible medicinal oils that we have, that we just use at home, and we sometimes take for granted and don't realize that that is also another industry that we can tap into, combining that with cacao.
And it's also the same with the dried fruits as well. So all of those ingredients of the other value chains that can be developed to support the chocolate industry is really an open-ended opportunity that somebody just needs to take up and say, hey, let's grow these, instead of just staying with, you know, all your generic root crops and all of this, which is fantastic and that. But I think in order to venture out, because I think that's also what farmers are looking for. They're always curious to know, like they talk to me and ask me about vanilla and cinnamon when it's been right there the whole time. They hadn't actually done anything about it. So, you know, and I said, these are some of the key ingredients that go into chocolate making. And, you know, they're really surprised. And I think that education part of it is also crucial moving forward. And I think there are so many parts to all of this coming together. And some of each of those conversations can begin at the show with some of the people that you'll be meeting there at the show as well, and what you have to offer as well to the farmers that will be there too. Sorry, I don't want to take up so much time, but I will move on to the next question. And I can see that there's a lot of questions on there, so we'll try our best to answer them as well. So we've already answered the question number 3, which is sort of, you know, can the chocolate industry also sustain the Pacific supply of beans? We've sort of touched upon that. Is anyone wanting to say anything more about that? And I think here,
I guess as far as the small chocolate makers in New Zealand go, getting more on board with bulk ordering so that it's coming to one place, as it's starting to now already. But I've talked to other chocolate makers, and the access to the beans is one of the issues. So it would need coordination to get orders through, so, and having a depot, a place, and then an organisation to then feed the beans out to the appropriate places.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because I feel that, is Trade Aid doing that something similar? Una, is that something that they do for the South American beans?
Well, Trade Aid buy in large volume and bring it in direct, so then they sit on stock, so which is really great for young craft chocolate companies, and that they don't have to put a big investment up front. But that's a beautiful idea, Simona, and something that I would really love to establish and work with everybody to do that, because that's what makes it possible. Because one shipment can have a variety of different beans, different villages. So each craft chocolate company still have their own unique voice. Obviously, how you ferment, how you roast it, and how you do that expression. But also everybody likes to have their own unique supply, you know, to be that point of difference. But all of that can be done. It's so possible. So, you know, that is absolutely part of my vision, but I'd love to share it out there to make it happen. It's, you know, it'd be amazing.
It'd be a great conduit to bringing in new suppliers, new growers, and new users.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because but for myself, as a bringing it in, you know, one of the farmers who's going to be at the show from Papua New Guinea, right now, I've got an order for 3 sacks for him in New Zealand. I can't bring that in, 3 sacks. I need collaboration. I need commitment in terms of, yeah, but I'm looking at other products from Papua New Guinea to make that possible. But the more we work together, the more commitment there is to the Pacific throughout New Zealand, the greater the difference we will make. Yeah.
Phoebe, you wanted to add to that?
That's what we've had to do in New Zealand in Australia, sorry. I'm a Kiwi, so I feel like I'm just hanging out at home with you all. In Australia is to bring in various orders from other chocolate makers, other craft chocolate makers, to put in that big container. We realized bringing in 500 kilos at a time, just the profit margins just weren't enough. They weren't sustainable within Australia. And, you know, sometimes the cacao would have landed here and there were quality issues or there were other challenges on its journey here that rendered it unable to be used for craft chocolate, which is, I guess, why we started the looking into the beauty industry and looking at how we could still use that cacao for other things that wasn't consuming the cacao. But yeah, since then we've just brought in our second shipment of 6 tons of cacao, which is landed here last week, which is great of, trying to keep the price down, but also shipping has gone up, has doubled in cost compared to last year. A container is now $12,000. So as we thought we were bringing down the price by bringing in the container, it's still kind of leveling out in different ways. So, shipping is a really hard one too, as I'm sure we all know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's something that we'll probably touch on more in the second webinar, which is on the 29th. But thank you for that. That's really wonderful. Let's move along now into the beans themselves and the origins of the beans and the uniqueness of each country, each island, each plantation, because all the beans differ from plantation to plantation. Can we still make it a Pacific origin bean and still be is there a flavor profile for Pacific? For all of you who've got such wonderful palates that you've been so used to tasting all these different Pacific beans, what can you say now about the Pacific origin flavor?
Oh, we've been tasting a lot of chocolate leading up to the show. Just for example, with this 4 Solomon, really noticed 3 of them quite fruity notes, and then there was one that wasn't. Samoa. Yeah, sorry, Samoa, and 3 fruity and 1 was not. So that was really interesting. Yeah.
I think what Ernest said is absolutely right. There is such a diversity of flavour in the Pacific. It's almost we don't fully understand. We're only just learning the difference between some of those nutty, chocolatey, creamy flavours coming up out of the Philippines and Papua New Guinea compared to the fruity flavours coming out of Samoa and the Solomons is so dramatic, and there's such a variety in between. Potentially, it's something that we could take advantage of, put some information together about what those profiles are and where they're from, draw a map. This is our Pacific flavour map, and that could be a promotional tool. That's how we take it to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Fantastic. That is really awesome suggestion. I'll bring it to you, Arif. What's your view on that, and as a farmer? Yeah.
Yeah, I think different plantations and different islands will have different flavor profile. That's what we have found out, because the soil and the terroir makes a difference. But that's the beauty of it, as long as proper fermentation and drying is maintained. So the same quality is produced all the time. I mean, the diversity is the uniqueness. For example, we have in Vanua level, we have the Matasawa level cacao, and that is preferred by a lot of different chocolate makers, especially in the US. So it will be different, but that could be a blessing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Una?
Yeah, from my experience, any flavor profile can be found in the Pacific. So I've done unique blends for companies who wanted, whether a craft bean to bar chocolate maker can always bring out the best in the bean and make it shine. But then some companies wanted more of a rounded chocolate flavor because they wanted, like, as a couverture to use in pastries and more generic. And originally you would have thought that the beans in the Pacific were too fruity, but just sourcing from a different island, I was able to get deep chocolate notes and balance it. So it's all possible. It's all available in the Pacific. I just think on some level almost, and we're a little bit too familiar. And so whether it's India or Ecuador or somewhere sounds to New Zealand and Australia might sound a little bit more sexy, right? We've got to showcase the power possibility of the beans from the Pacific. Every flavor profile can be found and met. That's my experience. Yeah, so, and also what's done in New Zealand and Australia showcases it to the rest of the world. So we can put this caliber on the world stage for other countries to get really excited by what's available in the Pacific.
And it's also about storytelling and really understanding what's there on the land and spending some time. And I think one of the unique things and the unique experience that Una has is actually having come to our farm, you know, almost twice a year or 3 times a year, and then going to Solomon Islands as well, and just having that time. And I think that's a great thing that needs to, in terms of marketing, because you're going to go back and write stories about, you know, the beans that you're trying to sell, and the chocolate that you're making and that you're trying to effect that through marketing. And I think it's really key that you have that closer relationships to have the collaboration. So again, like what Mike and Simone were saying before, closer collaboration is very much in need here to understand the beans and the flavor profiles better. I'm getting a lot of questions. So I know that we've actually answered 2 of the questions already in that second lot. So I will go on to number 7. There are some islands in the Pacific which don't grow cacao, believe it or not, and can, you know, has the climate for it and everything. How can we start to introduce cacao on those islands? And the current dialogue is that there's huge interest from the Cook Islands, Niue and Tonga. So what are we going to do about that? Phoebe.
There's actually a huge interest with the Tongan diaspora here in Australia to support Tonga in cultivating cacao. So I think, you know, bringing the full community, the worldwide community, together to support it. You know, a lot of our Pasifika people that aren't living back home on our custodial lands do want to support our nations, but we're trying to figure out how do we do it in a way that you know is sustainable for home as well. And I think the conversations with, you know, the right people back home in those islands to get things up and running, the fundraising that we can do here, like Living Koko, and we've done so many different fundraisers for Samoa and trying to support some of our ginger farmers and things like that, to help them test their ginger, dry their ginger and get it export ready. You know, how can we collaborate using the skills and resources that we have here to support our people back home? I think that's a really good conversation that should happen.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Arif, what do you think that we should do there?
Yeah.
Without taking all away from Cal Fiji.
Yeah, no worries. I'm aware of efforts to reinvigorate cacao farming in Tonga, but in Fiji, you know, we had up to 3,000 hectares of land in cacao farming, and they're in some exotic islands as well. They're abundant, for example, Kioa, etc. So Taviuni, we would love for that to be restarted, and because we have seen the social economic impacts to these farmers in rural areas based on our work in 2 different islands, which is Viti Levu and Vanua Levu. So I mean, it's great for creating a source of income, but you know, it's bigger than what we are able to do as a small company. we need collaboration with different organizations, as well as of course the government, to create awareness that, hey, there's I think there's a global shortage predicted in cocoa, and certainly there's a growing demand for single origin. So we actually market our 2 different islands with different flavors. For example, Matasawa Lebu Dreketi, that's a plantation itself with the different flavor profiles, as opposed to Reki Reki. And in the company we have, Vanua Chocolate, we have actually introduced it, and we have seen that different customers, they will go for the different flavors. So there's something for everybody out there in terms of flavor profiles. And I think that this is a great idea, and I hope we could use this platform and the awards and the festival to sort of keep on walking and promoting this idea of cacao farming as a source of income.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Una?
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity in terms of expansion within the Pacific to do it again in a different way, where we're actually looking at introduction of cacao, but also the market it can feed. So rather than the investment going in only thinking about producing, and then later on there's the struggle to find the market, do them together hand in hand. So like in the Solomons, we're really looking at in terms of cacao butter and cacao powder, but before we commit to that, we're creating the market. So it's a win-win. So that really we look in those countries, we're like, right, do we have a small production facility? So those farmers are producing to put into that factory to produce value-added products, whether it's cacao nibs or, something, so that there's real value going back. So I think we can do it in a whole new way, really looking at a full sustainable picture. And that would be really exciting to do it from the ground up. Yeah, so to do it, but do it in a new way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's all about learning from our past experiences. We have so many stories with the cocoa board back in the day in Samoa as well, which is some of the things that, these ideas and things kind of recycle themselves. And I think doing things differently, we're often, when you're in a larger organization, people tend to be really scared to do something new. And I think that's why it's so great to have the international influence, and I guess the bean to bar chocolate makers, if they're there hand in hand with the market and with the farmers and encouraging them to do things in a new and different way, I think that can always be very successful. I have a question here, Whakalofalahi from Niue. I have been wanting to start a cacao farm here on the island, but I'm not sure where or which organization could get the beans for me to start from. I believe in the Cacao Pacific movement, and I'd love for our small country to be part of it. You're so lovely. So yeah, I mean, definitely I've been having these sorts of questions all throughout the promotion of the show, in terms of people just reaching out and just wanting to be involved and be part of the cacao movement. So you've started something. So was there any other thoughts on that question from Mike and Simone?
I'd just like to echo Una's comments that if you develop your customer base at the outset with the products in mind, I mean, you could go right back to selecting what varieties you're growing to create a certain flavor profile. You could do an experiment where you say the Pacific is so diverse, but Tonga has a specific profile because that's what they set out to do when they established it. And there's hundreds of years of information and expertise and experimenting that have gone on, that if you were to choose to use all that, you could do it differently than has been done before.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So how are we doing with time? Okay, we've got about 5 minutes. We just do one more question and then we can do sort of like a wrap up from each and every one of you, if that's okay. So we've got here, question 8, Australia has begun to grow and process cacao and making single origin chocolate there. What will this mean for the Pacific farmer producer? I know this is a bit of a tough question because, you know, cacao is for the world.
I don't think it will take the limelight away from the Pacific cacao. If anything, I think any cacao producer, whether in Australia or the Pacific, that has grown cacao sustainably, ethically, you know, if one gets celebrated, we all get celebrated. You know, if someone starts by eating Australian grown cacao and then that curiosity leads its way to the Pacific cacao, you know, that's a bonus for us all. We all rise. And you know, there's plenty of mouths in the world that we can all feed with our Pacific cacao too. Also, it's a really small band in Australia that can only, you know, grow Pacific cacao. It's in the Daintree area. In comparison to the lands, huge amounts of lands in islands in Samoa, you know, the Pacific would quantity they would be producing would be a lot more than in Australia.
Yeah, fantastic. Any other thoughts on?
The first thing that came to me was pricing. So if it's been produced in Australia, I'm sure there's a really realistic price being asked for it. So it could be awesome to set a benchmark of what we expect all cacao farmers to receive throughout the Pacific. That was the first thing. And then the other thing is that, you know, if we could get rid of this idea of competition and move to collaboration, that is where we have power in the Pacific. As much collaboration as possible, because it's not just that we're competing with other countries around the world. Rather than that, it's just like there's still a huge consumer base. There's still huge potential that has been untapped. We are famous for being outside the box and looking at things a little bit differently because we are on, you know, the other side part of the world, and we just need to be creative and collaborative. And there's still a huge possibility. And we just, if we can remember that, and we really work together on as many levels as possible, then it's irrelevant which country is producing it within the Pacific. Just work together for the rest of the world and bring it out in new ways and beautiful ways with high quality cacao that the whole Pacific is famous for.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. That's great. Arif, any final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I love Una's point over there about collaboration. I've actually visited a farm maintained by the University of Queensland, and a program ran by Mr. Yan, a gentleman by the name of Yan. And
Alice?
I think we can learn from their sort of experiments and benefits, and how to increase our productivity. Yeah, so I like the fact that they are growing cacao over there, and there's lessons to be learned and transferred over, so we can you know, benefit from that.
And they're also learning from us, just from following his page and everything. And yeah, it's really wonderful to see. I am going to push this question through. Number 10, will close the collaboration, and I think we can all agree on it. But if we could just kind of wrap it up with this question, will closer collaborations between farmers and chocolatiers equate to better incomes for farmers? And will it mean the conscious consumer will be willing to support the higher margins of the supply chain?
I think we've got the potential to affect that. I think we really do. We're in a position to set up a culture for how cacao and chocolate are handled in the Pacific. If to take it to its nth point, you could look at a cooperative or a federation of Pacific cacao. These things are bloody hard to create and manage, but if there's some way that we could put it together that we were semi-formally working together for the betterment of all. is it possible?
Yeah.
And the consumers, I think, are getting really smart and clued up about where their food actually comes from. So with bean to bars, you know, selling the 85, 90 gram bars are selling between $10 and $14 in New Zealand, and the consumers are paying that because they understand now there's a story and history, and that's part of the bar that they're buying, you know, so the consumers are paying a good price for these bean to bars.
Yeah, absolutely. And also when they see what we have to go through to actually drag the beans up to Dreamview as well, right? Wonderful. So Phoebe, can you just wrap it up for us in that question as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Simone and Mike have just said, that I truly believe that if we are collaborating, understanding the stories of our farmers, you know, in Living Koko, I go home 3-4 times a year back to Samoa to see my family, but also to visit the farms and the farmers and understand their perspective, what's happened in that year to maybe change the pricing of the cacao or to affect the way the cacao has grown. I feel like knowing those stories allows me to tell our community here in Australia exactly what's happening on the ground and why things are priced that way. And you know, I think a transparent value chain and shared valued approach is the best way forward. And you're right, Mike, I think it's amazing that we can possibly start this culture and, you know, show the world that there's a way that we can do this together with alofa, you know, with alofa for everyone in consideration.
Beautiful, Phoebe. Thank you for that. Arif, if you want to sort of wrap up with that question.
No, I think Phoebe has summed it up pretty well.
Fantastic. All right, Una, any other final words?
Well, I think on that point, it's fundamental, because I see a lot of like the marketing on packaging, particularly in the craft industry, that, you know, I see the difficulties that creates on the ground in terms of the supply, and it actually doesn't line up to what the reality is on the ground. For example, insisting it has to be certified organic in a country that's naturally organic, and what that would take and cost, and the impossibility of that. And yet that's what, say, a certain company needs or wants. So if that's the gap that really gets amplified versus the real story on the ground, and also things like the variety of the trees, and when we can get the real story of the ground and the villagers' lives, and, you know, exactly like Phoebe was talking about, that changes. It's like there's a narrative has come into the chocolate industry that's become quite fixed, and so we want to make it living and alive, so that the evolution of the farmers is reflected in what we put out in terms of for the consumers. So it's not pushing back onto the village to have something like certified organic, or we have to have that village's beans, even though that village may have been, you know, hit with an issue, and they don't want any other village's beans because that's what they, you know, are putting on the marketing. I've just seen all these problems and the problems it creates on the ground. So when there's a closer collaboration, there is more true communication to the end consumer of life on the cacao farm, of the life of these beans, of what's really happening, rather than a box of, you know. So yeah, so that's something that really comes by closing that gap, and it is possible. It really is. We have a bigger opportunity in the Pacific because it's so much more easy now. The borders are opening to actually go and be on the ground. So yeah, I think that's really important to keep the whole chocolate industry alive and true. Yeah, really true to the farmers, to the farming communities.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that, Una. Thank you, everyone, for those final words. What I wanted to quickly finish off with is that Living Koko, Phoebe Pruce, she's actually going to be one of the exhibitors. Actually, all of these wonderful people are exhibitors at the show. Please do come down and check them out if you're in Auckland. The show is on the 23rd, which is this Saturday, and we'll be doing some weird and wonderful things and showing you some new ways and new recipes and new ways of thinking about cacao. And also, this conversation has probably got you thinking about what do we need to learn more about cacao that is going to help our community and our families and our ainga. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Please come to the show. Arif, are you coming to this week, or are we just...
No, I won't be able to make it. Sorry about that.
No worries, but your beans are certainly in the competition. Thank you so much. And along with, I think, 7 other countries that are in the competition, and we're really looking forward to tasting all of the different flavor profiles from the different places where they came from. And we're so excited to taste the work of Mike and Simone. It's been such a wonderful time communicating and organizing this with all of you. This has been such a challenge. We've organized the show with people from all over the globe. There is very few people in Auckland, where Auckland is actually the base of the show, and there's probably a minute number of people in Auckland, but everything has been organized from around the globe, from Prague to Fiji to everywhere. So we're really super excited to go on and present you all with an amazing show about cacao, about a new way of looking at chocolate, and about an exciting future for perhaps creating an amazing organization that we can come together and support the Pacific in growing cacao and making chocolate. So here it is. Thank you so much, guys. Go buy your tickets. Buy 100 tickets. Get all your friends and family from overseas who are in Auckland tickets, and meet us there and have some hot chocolate, and Phoebe's going to do some great stuff, and everybody's going to be there. So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Flora. Look forward to seeing you all in person soon.
Yeah. Fabulous. Thanks so much for your time. Get well, Phoebe, before you get on the plane.
Right. Thanks. Bye, sis.
Everyone in the audience. Sorry about the messages. Oh, so
good one. Thank you. See you later.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
In a couple of days.